All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for joining us at the Companions for Change podcast. Myself, I'm Malik Bindadhum, and this is our brother Zain Razi, alhamdulillah, COO of Sahaba Initiative. And we are blessed to welcome Imam Shaykhna Reymundo Noor.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Good.
So when we first started this podcast, Arbaz and I were trying to come up with names of people that we thought were awesome and who we thought, people might not know about, have been kind of, mashallah, working in the community and doing a lot, but people might not know about. And, for me personally, you have always been one of the most intriguing people in the community. I don't know if I've ever told you this.
No, but that's great honor. Thank you.
And how I first met you and learned was when I was getting to know my wife, and I asked her, what are some shayukh imams you kind of grew up around or enjoy listening to or talking to, and you were the first name she brought up.
Subhanallah.
And that was my first introduction to you. And I remember, subhanAllah, I still remember the first time I heard you speaking. I couldn't believe that there was an imam who spoke perfect English, perfect Arabic, and perfect Spanish, mashallah.
Allahu Akbar.
And while I didn't understand any of the Spanish, I could still feel, mashallah, the passion. So maybe, if you don't mind, how did you kind of, get to the space where you are and, kind of in this position of being, mashallah, an imam that is able to communicate in so many different ways?
Barakallah fiqh, Malik, you're too kind with your words, actually, alhamdulillah, myself, I was born and raised in Panama. And we were raised on the Canal Zone, that area of Panama, which was controlled by the American government. So we grew up speaking both Spanish and English. And then back in 1984, I got a scholarship to go to the Middle East to study Islam and Arabic. And so even prior to going, I was very involved with the Muslim community in Panama in helping those people come to Islam and helping the ones who are there now to better themselves. It's something that I've always felt a calling to. And upon returning, I was in Detroit and so continued that work there. I feel blessed that we're able to help people from these different walks of life and barriers or languages, because Islam is for everyone, right? I truly believe that Islam should never be, as I said earlier today with Zain at the pantry, we should never be self-serving, right? We're there to serve other people. And I just thought I would use that which, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me to be able to further that cause.
MashaAllah. And how long did you spend overseas? I
was only there for 3 years,
okay.
84, 85, and 86, which is a long time ago, right? So I was only there for 3 years, but alhamdulillah, I knew how to read the language before I even went, right? And so that helped me a great deal while I was there. I was able to work my way through the Language Institute rather quickly because of that fact, right? But it was only for a short period of time.
But what was your experience like? So myself, I spent time studying overseas as well. And especially if you're kind of born and raised in one society and one kind of, mode of thinking, everything, when you go, especially to study overseas, it's almost like a shock.
Right.
How was it for you kind of going over there and dealing with that shock?
It's interesting that you say that, but in Panama, the vast majority of Muslims, at least at the time when I was growing up, they're from India, right? From Gujarat region in India. So as a Muslim, as I came into Islam and as a Muslim, I was used to being around the people from other places. So when I went to the Middle East, yes, I was coming from a Latin American society, a Catholic society, a non-Muslim society. But interestingly enough, it wasn't that much of a shock for me because of my experience with the Muslims from India in Panama. I actually enjoyed my time there. There were some quirky moments, but for the most part, it was very enjoyable. The idea of something that I had never experienced before, hearing the adhan call for Fajr in the morning and waking you up. It was something you don't find back home, at least not back then. So it was a very unique experience. And then I joined the basketball team.
Oh,
for Muhammad ibn Saud University in Riyadh. So we were able to play Quran, Medina University. And while we did that, we made Umrah, we visited. So there were some perks that came along with it. So I loved it. I really had a great time. I had a great time while we were there. I was also on the swimming team. I didn't do too good there. In the swimming matches, I came in after last. So I didn't do too good there. But basketball, I did fine, alhamdulillah. But it wasn't that much of a cultural shock for me. One of the things that has always fascinated me from the very beginning, and I became a Muslim at a very young age, right? But one of the things that have always fascinated me was the fact that in Islam, anyone can be a Muslim. I grew up in a region of Panama where even religion was segregated, right? And so when we heard of Islam, that anyone, it doesn't matter your culture or your race or your skin color, could be a Muslim, we gravitated towards that rather quickly.
MashaAllah.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you came to Islam?
I was 12 years old.
MashaAllah.
I was 12 years old at the time.
Allah.
Alhamdulillah.
Would you mind sharing kind of your story? Yeah.
It's not other than the age factor, it's not a fascinating story in the sense that, you ask some brothers and sisters, what brought you to Islam? I mean, some people have lightning flashing stories and all that, right? I don't have any of that, right? I was invited to come and listen to one of the lectures by the Imam at the time, Sulaiman Abdul Hamid, who was also our sensei in karate.
Oh, mashallah.
Right? And so I went one day, I was just bored out of my mind, sitting at home with nothing to do, right? So I said, let me go listen to see what these guys had to say. And I went out there and I listened and I said, I like that. And so I took Shahada. That's all there was to it. In Allah yahdi man yasha, right? Allah guides whomsoever He pleases, right? I liked it. And I took the Shahada, and as they say, the rest is history. Just like that.
Was this you on your own? It wasn't your family?
On my own. And to this day, I'm still the only Muslim in my family.
Subhanallah.
Right? So, alhamdulillah, it's Allah guides. And my family know I'm Muslim.
Yeah.
They respect it. They have their own culture and their own faith. And, and that's fine. But today, I'm still the only Muslim in my family.
Subhanallah. How did they react initially when you first took that jump at 12 years old?
Well, for my mother, it wasn't good. My father could have cared less, right? For my mother, it wasn't good. I'm her youngest child, right? And to be her youngest child, when she found out that I became a Muslim, she put me out the house.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is a thing that many people don't understand. Sometimes the journey that those of us who come into Islam have to go through, right? My mother put me out of the house, so I went to my sister's home, who was already married and out of the house. And she called her, said, and this was in 1970, right? And we did have telephones in Panama back then, right? So she called and said, why did you put him out? Oh, well, he changed religion, she said. Says my sister told her, said, you know what? If anything, this thing is going to keep him out of trouble. Not that I was always in trouble, and she said, okay, go ahead and come back home. So I ran back home, right? But initially, of course, my family, it was a little bit strange for them. And then, of course, I had to tell my mom, well, guess, Mom, I can't eat pork. And you know anything about Panamanian, Caribbean, Creole cooking?
Yes.
There's always some pork in there somewhere, right? A piece of pigtail or something in there somewhere. And she could have cared less about that. May Allah bless her, and reward her. But eventually she saw that I was serious about not eating pork. And I ate so much peanut butter and jelly sandwiches back then. And she realized I was serious about it, so she started cooking separately for me. But it was initially a little bit of an uphill battle. My grandfather, my father's father, he was a Mason, and that philosophy, or I'm not sure what they call it. They have a portion where they actually have to read the Quran. So my grandfather told my dad that I need to speak to him. So I went to his house and he said, your dad told me you became a Muslim. I says, yes, Grandpa. And he said, what do you know about Islam? So I told him what I knew at the time. I told him about the 5 pillars. And he says, he says, I've read the Quran. My grandfather. He says, I've read the Quran and stick to that. If you stick to that, you'll be okay.
Allahu Akbar.
My grandfather told me that, right? Allah knows best whether or not he had ever become a Muslim, but I understand that is part of that Mason ideology, that they must read the Quran, especially when they get to the higher ranks of the society, right? So which make me realize that he probably was at the higher ranks of society, right? But I didn't know that at the time. But that's, and then for the most part, it was just building myself and learning and navigating. I joined the Tablighi Jama'ah, right, in Panama, back then. And
so you went on Khuruj.
I did. and I know that is a very controversial group, so to speak, but a lot of good have come out. I credit them to giving me a really good, solid spiritual foundation.
MashaAllah.
Because I believe that's what's lacking in many people today, especially the reverts that are coming in. We learn Islam from a book perspective, and the spirituality of it is sometimes lacking for them.
SubhanAllah. Even though I've known you a very long time now, I'm learning so much.
I see, SubhanAllah.
And actually, SubhanAllah, learning even some parallels in my own life.
I see.
So my mother, Allah yarhamha, she converted while she was in college. Had a somewhat similar situation. But my grandfather, on the note of the Masons, SubhanAllah, my grandfather was a Mason. I did not know that he was one of the upper level Masons until, SubhanAllah, while he was on his deathbed, days before his death. My mother, my brother, and I, we were in Alabama taking care of him. And he called me into the room one day and he asked me, he started he was just talking, like he wasn't talking to me, but he was talking. And I started listening. And all of a sudden I started noticing, I'm like, wait, is he saying Quran? And then we start having more conversations and he's asking me about the Quran. And, alhamdulillah, we've tried to give da'wah, from the family. They all, of course, know we're Muslim and everything of that nature. But I mean, they're like staunch Bible stompers.
I see.
My grandmother was in charge of the Sunday school curriculum for all of the Baptist churches in Birmingham. So like Bible stompers.
Right.
Yet, on his death, he was asking me about the Quran, kept talking to me about the Quran. And I did not know that about Masons until after he passed away. And it made me think, like, how did he know so much about the Quran after, you know what I mean? Even though, many times we had given them the Quran. But SubhanAllah, it took me years to find out that that's actually how. And now you're reinforcing that. Right. And, SubhanAllah, it really is amazing.
It is. And I didn't know that about my grandfather either until that time. I had known him all my life and never had he indicated anything. I didn't know anything about Masonry, of course, and certainly not know that he was part of that, but until that time that we spoke. But, and it's interesting. It's a secret society, whatever it is that they do, I don't know. But there are actually quite a few Mason organizations in Panama. At least they were when I was growing up. I'm not sure about now, but I know that they were when I was growing up.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
Can you give kind of more of a picture of Panama? Because I feel like in America, right, we're always just ignorant of what's outside, despite the fact that our government is going and acting in a lot of these places and disrupting a lot of these places, right? We're so focused here. The whole world is here in America for us, and we're actually very, very ignorant of a lot of places that the rest of the world is very aware of.
Right.
So if you could speak a little bit more about the society of Panama, you know, that you grew up in, like you said, there was a lot of segmentation and things of that nature. How was that experience for you? How was the population? What was the society like?
I grew up on what they call the Canal Zone. You know, the United States of America, they control that area of around the canal. There's a 50-mile radius around the Panama Canal. They finished building it and it opened back in 1903. So they control that waterway because it's quite strategic, right? You know, it's an economic waterway. Ships don't have to go all the way down South America before going over to the Atlantic side. They can just go to the canal or vice versa. So the United States control what is known as the Canal Zone. On the Canal Zone, ourselves, the way our family ended up in Panama and specifically on the Canal Zone, when the canal was being built, it was started, by the way, by the French, and the United States took it from them, and they brought Chinese in to build the canal. There was a very big problem with malaria, and you know the Chinese physiology, they just couldn't stand it. They died out rather quickly, and so they decided, well, where can we get cheap labor? So they went to the Caribbean, and they went to Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia, Martinique, you know, all the Caribbean islands, and they brought laborers from those islands to Panama to finish the Panama Canal. So my family, part of my family, came over with those workers to finish building the canal, right? So and then my grandfather was born there, my father was born there. So we are, we have several cultures rolled into ours, and we know how people of African descent ended up in the Caribbean islands to begin with, right? During the transatlantic slave trade, you know, those powers would drop slaves off on the different islands for their plantations. So we were raised on the Canal Zone under United States influence in a Spanish-speaking country with Caribbean and African backgrounds, right? So we have 4 basic cultures rolled into us, right? Now, this is on the Canal Zone. The country of Panama itself is everything to the south, you know, and Panama is, the canal runs from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And then on both sides of that belongs to the Panamanian government, right? So when we go into Panama, we were Panamanians, so to speak, right? But because we grew up on the American side of Panama, we were looked at differently, right? We were too American to be Panamanian, and then when we went into, you know, for the Panamanians, and then for the Americans, we were too black to be Americans, right? So the Canal Zone at that time was governed by the state laws of Louisiana. Right, so you can imagine everything that was happening in Louisiana in the 50s and 60s was actually happening in Panama, right? We had gold and silver fountains where, you know, black people could only drink from, you know, silver fountains. You had the bus segregation. We had all of that on the Canal Zone in Panama, right? On the Canal Zone. At least that's where, you know, by the time I was born and raised, most of it was gone. Right, but you could still see some remnants of it, you know, throughout the Canal Zone. The governor, I should say, was always white. There was never a black governor, or they were always brought the governor from the United States. So at least that's where I grew up. In the country of Panama itself, and the rest of it is completely Spanish speaking, right? Completely Spanish speaking, Catholic by its very nature. You know, Panama used to be a colony. A part of Colombia, I should say. Panama used to be a part of Colombia, and we know that most of Latin America were colonies of Spain, right? And so Catholicism, it was or probably still is, the dominant religion in all of Latin America, including Panama, with the exception of course, the Canal Zone, and they brought other religions, Baptist, Protestant, things like that, to the Canal Zone. My family, my mother sent us to the Methodist Church, right? So we grew up in the Methodist Church. I actually stopped going to church when I was 8. For some reason, it never really appealed to me, right? And so I stopped going to Methodist Church when I was 8, and then at 12 I became a Muslim. I remember one of the last times I went to church, my mother always gave us 25 cents, my sister and I, when we go to put in the collection box, right? I told my sister, I said, I'm not putting any money in the collection box. I want to see what's going to happen if I don't put money in the collection box. And she said, oh, you better put the money in the collection box. I said, no, I'm not. And she is older than I am. So that day at church, I decided to just pass the collection box. She put her quarter in there, and I kept my quarter, and I expected something to happen. Nothing happened, right? So after church, I went and I bought bubble gum. Right? Because nothing happened. And ever since then, I didn't put any more money in the collection box. But I stopped going when I was 8 years old. It just never really appealed to my 8-year-old mind. I just couldn't get, I presume, what we were supposed to get out of it. I just didn't get that. But at 12, when I heard of Islam, I somehow gravitated towards it, So the experience there, growing up on the Canal Zone, there was some prejudice. There was some racism. We were growing up, for all intents and purposes, it was almost an apartheid system, right? Because the housing in which they gave us to grow up in were very different than the housing in which the Americans lived, right? We couldn't own anything on the Canal Zone. You couldn't buy property on the Canal Zone. Couldn't own anything, right? It was all rented. Very low rent, but it was rented. You couldn't own anything. Back in 2000, in the year 2000, the canal was given back to the Panamanian government, and the United States pulled out of Panama. And so now all that area, of course, now you can buy property there. The area that we grew up in is very different, but it's still there, right? But it's not as it was when the United States presence was there.
Do you feel that the United States coming and building that canal, did it bring any benefit to the people of Panama, or was it mainly to the Americans?
It brought benefit to the people of Panama. It depends on how you look at that, right? The Panamanian government used to charge the American government rent, so to speak, for managing that area. And of course, that money was paid directly to the government, but very little, if any, of that money trickled down to the actual Panamanian people, right? The government, they kept most of that. So even though the Panamanian government was benefiting from it, the people of Panama never really benefited that much from it. Yes, it belongs to them. It's in our country, but the people don't really benefit from that at all. And when they negotiated to give the canal back to Panama, where people thought that would make a difference. Now that Panama is collecting their own tariffs and things like that for ships to go through, that the people would see some of that. They still don't see any of that money, So unfortunately, it is one of the wonders of the world. When it was built, and it still is. It's the Panamanian government have even expanded it, right? Because now there are ships that are too wide to go through the canal. So they've built a parallel section for larger ships to go through, right? But again, the people still don't see. And it costs quite a bit of money to go to take a ship from either the Atlantic or the Pacific and go through the canal. But the Panamanian people don't really see much of that money at all. It's just it's lost up top. Exactly. Unfortunately. But does it bring prosperity to the country as a whole? I guess at some level, right? Panama is a very rich country. Every major bank in the world has a branch in Panama. Every major bank in the world has a branch in Panama. And because it's a tax-free haven. right? So, but again, what does that mean for the local Panamanian people? Not much. They don't see it. The country, they set themselves up to serve mostly the foreigners that come in rather than the people that live and work there.
You still go back?
I do go back every so often, and I like going back because I'm going back, and I mean it is my home, it is my land, I was born and raised there, but it's very different. It's very different. Again, it's I feel sometimes when I go back, that I don't have a country, right? Because what we knew Panama as on the Canal Zone no longer exists, and even though we are in the country where the canal is housed, the culture and most of that is very different from for us that actually grew up on the Canal Zone. So it almost feels like you don't really have a country, which is interesting for us. But that's just how it feels. But I do like going back.
MashaAllah. Kind of bringing that to your experience here, working as an imam, right? Working at masajid that can be very diverse, right? Of people that are coming from all over, many people who are displaced from their own countries. How was your experience trying to lead a community that is extremely diverse and, even seeing sometimes the cultural battles that can go on between the different segments? One of the most notable ways that it happens in a lot of communities is, it'll be, for instance, the African Americans and the Arabs.
Right.
And extremely difficult to kind of bridge that gap. So kind of what was your experience in leading a community, that was diverse?
More of the same. I find that it's a matter of education, right? I think it's a matter of education, or Arab brothers that come to the United States for whatever reason that they come to the United States. I believe that we do owe a bit of recognition to those African-American, people of African descent that were born and raised here for a number of reasons. We know that the Immigration Act that the United States initiated was a direct result of the civil rights movement. We know this for a fact. This is documented, which allowed people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Arab world, from other parts of the non-European world to be able to come to the United States. It is a direct result of the civil rights movement. So I believe that people owe the African-American community here a little bit of recognition, right? Because it was their sweat, it was their blood, it was that push that agenda for people to be recognized, and that's all they were fighting for, is for recognition. Leading a Muslim community, unfortunately, we find that there also, and it has always been an uphill battle, and even today. I remember in my community, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years, maybe not that long, the youth had a program, and one of the young boys were telling off-color jokes, right, against the black people that were there. And none of the adults there said anything. And when I found out about this, I was very upset. So the first chance I got, and I went to the administration of the masjid, and I actually gave them a good piece of my mind, right? That how can you allow this type of thing in your own community, right? For me, leading communities, yes, I've had to deal with it. But again, it's just a matter of education. And some people, once they know what your stance is on the issue, they try not to be that, at least not in front of you, right? They try to hide that as best they can. But you know what you know, and you know who you know. Yeah. And so we tend to address that. I remember in Vista, when I was the Imam of the community in Vista, we started that masjid with a handful of revert families. And there was one brother there who was extremely prejudiced, racist, or whatever term we want to give it. And he would stand on the minbar on Fridays and says Arabs are better than everybody else, right? Because Allah revealed the Quran in Arabic and that he chose the Prophet ﷺ out of the Arabs, And we had to tell, you know what? When the people come to Jummah, they don't come to hear that. They come to hear about Allah and His Prophet. Certainly not from that perspective, right? And but he would continually repeat this, and so one day we literally, by his shirt and pants, threw him out the masjid, right? Unfortunately, I had to come to that, right? But and you have some people with this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, He created us this way differently for a reason, so that we may know each other, right? And again, I have always enjoyed that issue in Islam. People from different cultures and races and background. I have always been fascinated by that you can talk to people about their culture and then see different things. To see that other people use it as a way to separate us rather than to bring us together is actually very sad. But that's where they are, and I hope that it becomes better for them in that sense, right? But we didn't wake. I mean, we didn't wake up this morning and realize, oh my gosh, I'm black, or oh my gosh, I'm white, I'm Arab. No, this, subhanAllah, Allah, we couldn't choose who our parents are. I mean, who could choose their parents? We can't choose that. So the fact that you were born into an Indian, Pakistani, Arab family, or black family is of no choosing of, it's not your choice, right? So why should it be a means for separation between us when we didn't choose it? Right?
Yeah,
so,
subhanAllah. And it's interesting. Sorry. No. It's interesting when, growing up I have the half African American, half Arab. And on each side, depending on the situation, you're not enough to be that.
Right.
You're never really enough to be black when you're half. You're never really enough to be Arab when you're Arab. Right. Unless something happens or you're doing something and they're like, no, he's ours. Right. But, something interesting with kind of what's going on in the world that I've noticed, especially in the past year, with everything that's going on in Palestine.
Right. And,
the history of Black liberation and, Palestinian liberation, right? In the, one of the first times the PLO was hosted in Algeria with the Black Panthers, right? Bringing all of them together, right? That history of fighting against oppression and colonialism is, something that goes beyond color and race and all of these different things. And I've noticed more that this is a time where, because we have brothers and sisters that are just dying in droves, the community has almost realized it's not the time to focus on these things. They don't really matter.
Right.
Literally, people are dying.
Right.
And I've seen that increasing more, not as much as I think is needed, but I feel like this can be an opportunity that we can take advantage of to really start bridging that gap, right? For, the brothers and sisters, especially from the Black, African-American communities that have been fighting this fight for so long, that have family members that marched, that had dogs sicked on them, that lived in a Jim Crow era, and all of these different things, right? To be able to learn, from South Africans and kind of, how apartheid, going through apartheid and getting out of apartheid, and truth and reconciliation and all of these different things, right? That we no longer have time to say, oh, well, that's just them or anything like that. We really have to just start getting to work and start working together. And I see it as an opportunity, but I guess my question to you is, I don't fully know how we can capitalize on that. How we can start really, now that people are in the frame of mind of, okay, we can't keep thinking about, oh, well, those are that's the Black masjid, they're the Black people. No, when brothers and sisters in Gaza die, it doesn't matter what masjid you're coming from, where you're coming from. They're dying.
Right.
We need to stand up. That's what our deen teaches us.
Right.
So how can we take advantage of this moment to bridging those schisms that we have amongst the community for our brothers and sisters in Gaza, but also just far beyond that.
I think, Malik, that if we take away the race portion of all of this and focus on the humanity of it, I believe we can make more headway if we do that, right? The fact that in Gaza, 100% of the people who are dying are Muslims, right? That is no, excuse me, that is no coincidence, right? It's strategically planned. So if you take away the race issue and focus on the humanity issue of it, I believe we could make headway. I truly hope that, it's a big question and it's a big task, right? But I truly hope that those who need to learn that lesson, right? Because it's sometimes we don't take interest in something until it applies to us, until it comes knocking on our door, and all of a sudden it becomes important. It has always been important, and only because it didn't apply to you doesn't make it less important. So I am hoping that now that it's happening to our brothers and sisters, not that we want this to happen, but I'm hoping that everybody that this is affected, because there are protests around the world, not only from Muslims, right? From everybody, because it's a humanitarian crisis. So I am hoping that helps to galvanize everyone, especially the Muslims, behind this cause and behind any other cause that may affect any group of people. Again, it's such a big issue, and I truly hope that those who need to learn the lesson. And I'll come to you saying, one brother in the Coachella Valley said some time ago, he was giving a khutbah, and he said that, unfortunately, we, the Muslims, whenever we hear of a problem or something happening, or whenever they are giving, the Imam on the minbar is giving advice about something that we shouldn't do or what we should do. And he said, in the mind of most of us, we say, that doesn't pertain to me, so I'm not going to pay it any attention. Unfortunately, it does pertain to us, right? Gaza may be a half a world, away from us, but it does pertain to us, right? Because, our country helps, in whatever way they help. It affects us, the American citizen, in other ways also. I mean, we know that the incidences of hate crimes has increased because of what's going on there, because of what's going on in other parts of the world. So I'm truly hoping that among the Muslims, that lesson is learned quite well, because it's just a matter of time before it reaches the country that you came from. You see, it's just a matter of time. I mean, this is how colonization works.
Exactly.
Systematically going from one country to the next, dominating. And it's just a matter of time before it get to your particular country that you came from. But it's big. I don't know that I have the answer for that, but are there lessons in it for us to learn? I believe so. But we have to own it.
Absolutely.
We have to own it. We have to own the situation. We have to own the reality in which we live in here in the United States. I mean, we were just helping at the pantry, and the vast majority of people coming through that are unhoused or that are food deprived are Blacks and Latinos, right? And the question is why? Why do the poverty issues happen primarily among, these groups of people? And I know, yes, there are whites that are poor. Yes, there are Indians that are poor, Native Americans that are poor. I guess it affects everyone all the way around, but primarily we see that this is your clientele, right? And the question is why? I mean, San Bernardino, Zane and I were talking earlier, is the largest county, I thought, in California. He educated me, the largest county in the country. And so, subhanAllah, and more than 20% of the people are unhoused or have food issue. That's to be the most powerful, the richest country in the world. For us to have people that are in that condition, it should be ashamed. We should be ashamed to have that at our doorstep.
Absolutely. And, before go to Zayn, just one thing I wanted, there was a Christian priest from Gaza who was essentially talking about this. And he said something that I thought was beautiful. He said that none of us thinks it affects us until we realize it affects us all.
Right.
We don't think because it's out of our purview, whatever, but it actually does affect us all. And even just thinking about it, from a practical point of view here in the US, right? Like you said, we're dealing with 1 in 4 children in San Bernardino are food insecure. In other words, they do not know where their next meal is coming from.
Right.
And especially during the summer when they're not in school, where they're not getting those school meals.
School meals, right.
Where are they getting their food from?
Right.
Right. It doesn't make sense that, again, richest, most powerful country in the world, yet we have people today, we have children today that don't know where their next meal is coming from.
Right.
Yet every single bomb that has landed on Gaza was paid for by our tax dollars.
Right.
Yet we cannot find the solutions to help our people locally. Not our, the black people, or most our people.
People in general, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a huge dilemma. It's a huge, and again, it's that, this experiment of democracy, is that what it boils down to? Mm-hmm. Is that the reality of it? And I don't know. It's something that someone needs to be talking about. And the fact that we are hinting at it and bringing up this discussion, it should be an impetus. It should be something that sparks other debates, for people who can make a difference and make a change. Yeah.
I think I once watched a really interesting talk by Imam called The Irony of Democracy. I don't know if you've seen it, where he essentially...
Zaid Shakir?
Zaid Shakir.
Okay, yeah.
Where he essentially says that all democracy throughout history eventually end up just becoming oligarchies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Aristocracies, where it's just controlled by this top level of people, right? Essentially in America, when it's paired with this capitalism, right? It's hard to have a true system that is served and controlled by the people when the power lies in the money. But that's inshallah what we're dealing with. And it's a very interesting time to grow up as an American Muslim youth, I think, because you're growing up and alhamdulillah, you've been taught, and rightfully so, that you have your brothers and sisters are all Muslims all around the world. So you look around the world, you have them dying in Gaza, you have them dying in Sudan, you have them in concentration camps in, the Uyghurs in East Turkestan, you have the Rohingya, you have, Yemen.
The Uyghurs in China.
Right. Yep. And, in that region, inshallah, we're forgotten about way too often, right? And it's very difficult. It's very difficult, especially as things are framed. I remember many of them, the youth are struggling to process this. Some of them, a lot of them that I've known that have tried to fight for Palestine, they start processing it in an imperialist perspective. They're like, oh, anyone who's anti-imperialist is our friend, is the big guy. So now they think China's the good guy.
Right.
Well, what about the Uyghurs?
Right.
And they're struggling, like how you had your brothers and sisters, being oppressed all around the world. What do we do? What can we do? So I'm hoping that, with you having seen this for longer than I have, right? What is some wisdom that you could pass along? What do we do? We're trying to make an impact in our local community, but how do we build ourselves as a Muslim ummah in whatever way we can to be able to do something about this?
This is a great question, Zain. And it's when it comes to our youth, here's one thing I believe. I taught for a very long time, and I do lots of counseling to families. There's one thing that I know for sure among the young Muslim population, right? Or young brothers and sisters, if you're a parent and listening and watching, right? They are going to do more of what they see us do, more than what they hear us say. Period. Right? This is a fact, right? You can, and not to switch the topic, but you can tell your daughter to wear hijab, but if she doesn't see her mom wearing hijab, what you have implanted in the subconscious that it's not that important, right? You can tell your sons and daughters to make salah, but if they don't see us making salah, we have implanted in their subconscious that it's not important. likewise, on these social issues, you can tell them that the blacks are brothers and sisters, right? But if you never invite one to your home, you're telling them they're really not. You understand what I'm saying? And I'm not saying everyone needs to open their doors, right? I understand that, but how do you show that we are truly brothers and sisters so that we can grow up with the proper frame of mind that this is my brother, regardless of what the color of his skin, so how do the youth today grow up unless they see it? Unless they see it, there are plenty of hadith of the Prophet that we can quote on the issue. But I remember the Hindu Mahatma Gandhi. One thing that he said that have always stuck with me, he says that you have to be the change that you want to see. We can talk about change, but unless you become that change, which is what Sahaba Initiative is doing. We can talk about poverty all day, about food insecurities all day, what are we doing about it? And I think this is a great example of, look, talking is okay when we need to talk to figure out the issues, but let's do something about it. Let's be the change that we want to see, in whatever small way. You and I were talking earlier, we're not looking at a change for the next 5 or 10 years. We're looking at change for the next 100 years. When we're dead and gone, a sadaqah jariyah, set something up in so that it can continue to grow when we are not here. That's the kind of change that we're looking. I truly believe, right, when these issues, and it's a political issue, I realize, but if our Muslim brothers in all our Muslim countries, so to speak, if the governments of those countries were to get together and said, okay, enough is enough, it would put an end to most of what we see in the world. Yeah. Right? But one of the problems that we have at that level, we also have the same problem at the lower level. We don't trust each other. Yeah. Right? We see that manifest every year at Ramadan. Right? One of the most important pillars of Islam, right? We can't decide when to fast together. We can't decide when to break the fast together. And the question is why? Why does it have to be that difficult? Yeah. Right? And again, there's an element of non-trust in there. Right? So I always ask the question. I said, brother, you have this XYZ understanding of when and how the moon is supposed to be sighted. You're telling me that if your father comes to you and says, son, I saw the moon. I just happened to be in another continent, but I saw the moon of Ramadan. You're telling me you won't believe your own father only because it needs to be sighted in your own locality? This is your father telling you, I saw the moon. So would you not believe your father? They didn't have an answer. Right? But again, this is the problem that we face as an ummah, is that everyone we're comfortable in the space that we have made for ourselves. And we tend to look at anyone outside of that space as not like us or that we are better than, which is a big problem, right? More directly to your question is, we have to frame Islam globally for young brothers and sisters coming up. While we operate locally, we have to frame it in a global manner. Islam, I said earlier, we should never be self-serving, right? We should not only serve the community in which we live, but the global community at large, right? And if we can frame it that way, that, this ummah is one ummah and truly one ummah, we get a glimpse of that at Hajj. Yeah. Right? That we go out there and again, it's most of the scholars say it's a rehearsal for the Day of Judgment, right? Yeah. When everyone is going to gather and all that. But how much? And I would ask, how much? Which of us go to Hajj and walk away, leave Hajj with 5 or 10 more friends from a different country or culture than we didn't have before? Right? Yeah. I don't know the answer to that, but if that's what it's about, if it brings us together from all walks of life and as brothers and sisters doing the same exact ritual in the same exact way, right? Yet still we walk away and go back to our countries without ever making another friend from whatever, Tanzania or whatever, or where some other country, you know, that we didn't know anything about before, right? So here in America, I believe we are in a unique position to educate, right? To educate our youth or young people, and by extension, the world, because they're the ones that are going to grow up and be out there. And it's based on that understanding, that's how they're going to operate, right? Yeah. A kid who grows up thinking that a black is less than, whether they're Muslim or not, the minute they grow up and become an adult, guess what? That's what they're going to be. That's how they're going to behave. Yeah. That's exactly how they're going to behave, right? And likewise, but if they grow up thinking we are one ummah, then that's how they will behave. Yeah. So, because these are all learned behaviors. These are all learned behaviors. Yeah. Right? No one is born a racist, right? Or a bigot. No one is born that way. This is something that is taught to us, you know, by watching our parents, right, say or do it. And we figure, well, that's the way to be. Yeah. You know. I mean, it's and it goes in all aspects of our life. You know, a young girl who grows up seeing her mom being abused by her father thinks in many cases, well, that's how relationships go. It's okay if he beat up on me. Yeah. That's what relationships are. And that cycle continues. So we talked about the cycle of poverty earlier, and there's no way to break it. You know, how do you break that cycle? You see, and for us, the Muslims, it's the same thing. If we teach our children negative ideas and if we behave in a negative way, if we speak in a negative way, that's what our children see. That's what they experience. And unfortunately, that's what they grow up with.
When you first had children, is there anything that you were very intentional about? Even little things that you said, this, I need to make sure I do this, so I pass this on to my children.
Exactly that you're saying, that all people are the same. I made sure that my kids grew up with that understanding. And, you know, it's funny you asked that question. And I don't know if it's because of the things that I did in communities, right? I remember one of my daughters was born back in Panama, and every payday, when I got paid, I would take her downtown with me. She was barely 2, 3, 4 years old. I'll take her downtown Panama with me, and I'll take $20, $30, $40 and change it into coins. And we would walk up and down Central Avenue, one of the main avenues, and I would give her money to give to the poor. And she'd decide how much she wanted to give. Oh, give me 2, Dad. You know, she didn't know how to count the money at that far. Give me 2 or 3. And I would just give it to her and have her give it to them personally. Develop that empathy. Yeah. You know, for people who don't have one, that are sitting on the side of the road with their kids begging for money. I remember doing that. I remember telling them, you know, people, they need to be respected, not because they don't have, that means you treat them as less than. Yeah. That was the one thing I instilled in my children. And what's funny, and I say funny because I don't know if it's because of the things that I did in Muslim communities. Oftentimes, my family and I get invited to homes. We are the only non-Arab or the only non-Pakistani in the whole group, right? Yeah. They invite, and I'm like, where is everybody else? You know, we are the only ones that, you know, I'm, you know, black, growing up from Panama by way of the Caribbean and Africa. You know, my wife is Mexican. We are the only non-Arab or Pakistani in the entire group. And it's interesting. I'm like, well, why are you inviting us? I'm grateful, right? Alhamdulillah. Well, why are you not inviting other people? I mean, it's your home. You can invite whoever you want. I get it, right? But why? What's wrong with the rest of the community? Yeah. You know?
I think it's that mentality where, you know, subconsciously, most Muslims, even though they know, and this is where it comes to the by the blood versus spirituality, I want to bring you back on that too, right? They know in their head that everyone is equal. Right. In their heart, they're still like, this is my people, right? They're closer connection to the closer. Maybe partially that's natural, but I think we have to, you know, at some point, to really gain a real level of Islam where we can make a real difference globally, Islam has to be a bigger uniting factor than your race.
Right. It's bigger than you and I any day. It is bigger than you and I any day. And we need to behave like it's bigger than you and I. We need to make ourselves do those things that push ourselves out of that comfort zone, right? That I'm only going to be around the group that I can speak my language with comfortably, right? And we get that all the time, right? And even though we know that this is against the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right? We know there's a hadith on the issue. Some people do it anyway. So I'm just more comfortable doing it. Like, forget the hadith, I'm just more comfortable doing this. I'm like, well, hold on. I mean, at what point do you begin to practice what Islam say?
Yeah.
At what point do you begin to practice what Islam says? Because, and I 24 years ago, when I went to Fresno to start the Muslim school there, what is now called Valley Crescent School, one of the parents saw me at the camp, at the Muslim camp, right? And he says, Brother Noor, I want to thank you. My son comes home every day and he tells us what we're learning in school, and Brother Noor teaches this and Brother Noor teaches that. And I said, well, I'm glad. That's very good. He said, but I told him we're not doing any of that, because that's not the way we do it back home. I said, what? I said, what? He said, yeah, I told him we're not doing any of that because that's not the way we do it back home. And I said, so why are you wasting my time? Why are you wasting my time sending your son to the school to learn something that you have absolute no intentions of him implementing in your home? This is the mentality that we're dealing with, right? That even though they know differently, they just kick it to the side just to practice what is more comfortable culturally, right? And Islam didn't come to do away with your culture, right? There's nothing, if you grew up with chimichanga and then fine. The chimichanga, it's a Mexican dish, right? If you want to eat chimichanga, just make sure the chimichanga has halal ingredients.
Yeah.
That's all. It didn't say, well, you must become a biryani and a kofta eater. No, you can eat whatever, arroz con pollo, you can eat whatever it is you grew up with. Just make sure that it has the proper ingredients. That's all. It didn't come to do away with your culture. It came to make it better. Yeah. And this is what many of us don't understand. It make bad people good and good people better. This is what Islam is about, And when it comes to culture, all those things in your culture that goes against what Allah has revealed for humanity, then we should change that as a Muslim, regardless of what culture we come out of, right? I mean, and it doesn't matter if you come from a culture that have been Muslim now for the last 3, 4, 5 centuries. That has nothing to do. We do have things in those cultures that are contrary to Islam, right? Same in Coachella, and I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling, but just to make a point, right? In Coachella, I was the assistant Imam there, and after Jummah, one brother came to me and he said, "Can I have the mic? I need to make an announcement." I said, "Okay, fine." Gave him the mic. And he was raising funds, right? He's trying to raise funds for a couple who wants to get married, but he's raising funds for the bride, because the bride need to pay the groom the dowry. And I said, where did this come from? Oh, well, in our culture, this is what we do. The parents of the bride is who gives the family of the groom. I said, that is so opposite to what Islam said, but that's their culture.
Yeah.
And you can't tell them, and it's not Islamic, right? Because that's what they said. This is where we do it back home. Never know mine is against what Allah and His Prophet said, right? But that's what they did. And he was raising funds to give to this family of the bride to pay the family of the groom. Isn't it the other way around? Right, it is the other way, based on Islam. But again, small examples of things that we do, and we just completely disregard the proper Islamic procedure in these things, right?
I wonder how that fundraiser went.
Well, he may have gotten a few dollars, right there, but people who are of the same culture, right? They probably got a few dollars there, but it didn't go too far. But because it's not what Allah and His Prophet revealed, and unfortunately, we find a lot of that type of thing in our ummah.
Yeah.
So ask one more before getting it back.
Of course, yeah.
because I want to bring you back to this before we let it go, because you mentioned that when you're with the Tabligh Jamaat, they taught you spirituality, so it wasn't just by the book.
Right.
Many people are just teaching book Islam. It's interesting to me because this word spirituality has been interesting now for a couple of years.
Right.
Because it's now being used, especially in Western society, and where perhaps it wasn't before. I used to, when I was at the Muslim Student Union at USC when I went to school there. It was the Office of Religious Life, ORL. Now it's ORSL, Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. Because now many of these young kids, they say, "Oh, I don't want to be religious. I don't have a religion.
I'm just spiritual." Right.
Spiritual. I'm like, what is spirituality? Right? What does that even mean? Right. So I want to get your take on what you kind of mean when you. What is your idea of spirituality? Especially from the Islamic perspective, and what is it when you say they taught me that spiritual side, and we need to make sure that we maintain that as we move forward, and not just the book side.
It's interesting. It's a great question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. أليس كذلك?
No.
And that is what I mean by spirituality. That Allah says that the believer is successful who have khushu' in their salah. For example, I'm speaking of that type of spirituality where you can stand before Allah and pray, and you have developed the khushu', the discipline that you can actually focus in your salah. I got that from the Tabligh Jama'ah, right? Where you can truly engross yourself into the salah, or into your fasting, or into any act of ibadah that you're doing, to feel that you're doing, and not just on a surface level. That is what I got from them, right? Not from the perspective that, like, we're using the term spirituality, spiritual today. No, but the fact that we would go around to different places and travel around. And the truth is, if it wasn't for these guys, most masajid at Dhuhr and Asr will be empty.
Yeah.
They're mega masjid, but at Dhuhr or Asr, they're empty. If it wasn't for these guys coming around sometime and being in the masjid and going out and just for somebody to be in the masjid to make salah, right? Granted, we have the example of the man who spent his days in the masjid praying, and the Prophet ﷺ asked him, "Do you have a family?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, who takes care of them?" He said, "My brother." He said, "Well, your brother's better than you." Right? So we have that example in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that, yes, there's nothing wrong with developing your spirituality, but we shouldn't neglect the other aspects of our life, right? Because that they go hand in hand. So when it comes to that, that's what I got from the Tabligh Jama'ah. The fact that you can sit and make dhikr, and the Quran, Allah in the Quran talks about dhikrullah all the time. Right? And the remembrance of Allah, and tazkiyatun nafs, the purification of the soul. I got that from hanging out with the Tabligh Jama'ah brothers, as a young Muslim coming up. And I credit them for that. Even today, it has stuck with me, right? And so I got that from them in that respect. So every Islamic movement has a purpose, has a role, in this body of Islam that we are in. They may be a finger, right? They may be an arm. But they have a role that they play towards the wholeness of the Muslim Ummah, and that's how I see them. They're controversial, yes, in what they do and how they do it, and some of their ideas are just way out there, all honesty, but for the role that they play, sometimes it's critical and crucial in some communities, right? So I'm hoping that some people, if you really want to develop some spirituality, hang out with these guys for a couple of weekends, 2-3 weekends a month, and you will see that what do they do? Stand in the dhikr all day, or in Ramadan, they're big on i'tikaf in the masjid, right? They're big on that. So, you will really develop that spiritual aspect of your deen, right? And not just practice on a superficial level. Everyone makes salah, 5 salah, and you go through the motions, and, what do you feel any different after Dhuhr, after Asr? Most of us would say, no, I don't feel any different.
Yeah.
I did it because I'm supposed to, but what did I get out of it? They don't feel like they got anything out of it other than a check mark, right? Place and time, they did the salah, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, so that's what I mean when I say the spirituality. But thanks for the question.
Well, one thing I just want to ask you before we wrap up, alhamdulillah, one of the segments of the community that often gets forgotten about, and especially as we were talking about community and different segments of the community coming together, oftentimes the one that's forgotten about or pushed to the side or neglected, I would say, are brothers and sisters who were formerly incarcerated. A lot of them come to Islam when they're on the inside and they read about Islam, right? They read the Quran, they read the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it brightens their light, and they get this beautiful, amazing picture of what Islam should be.
Right.
And then they come out. And I believe it was Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens, who said that I'm so glad that I learned Islam before I met Muslims.
Right.
Because, oftentimes they'll come home and what they learned about Islam is oftentimes the furthest thing that they see from Masajid. So I guess from your perspective of being someone who has been, involved in chaplaincy and dealing with brothers and sisters on the inside, what can our communities do to be more welcoming, be more inclusive of our brothers and sisters who are coming home?
It's an interesting dilemma, I should say. I currently work as a chaplain in a state institution. And so I see those Muslim brothers who have become Muslim while incarcerated, and many of them have left the prison and gone home, especially after lengthy sentences, 25, 30-year sentences, right? And even though most of them don't go back to prison, many of them end up leaving Islam. Because believe it or not, it's easier to practice Islam inside the prison than it is to practice outside of prison, right? And because, once you're out of prison, you have life that you have to deal with. I have to find a job to pay rent, to pay a light bill, to pay a car bill. I need a car, the gas, change the oil. All these things that those of us who have never been incarcerated, we find it as a normal part of living. Yeah. For them, for the last 25, 30 years or more, they haven't done any of that.
Yeah.
They haven't done any of it. They live in for free, they eat for free, they have medical, everything. And so they don't know how to, in most cases, how to go about those things. So it becomes overwhelming. Now, what I tell them before they leave, or even while they're in, we have this conversation almost every week. The Muslim community will welcome you, but they are afraid of you. They're afraid. Can you imagine a Muslim this guy has got tattoos all over. He's got some horns tattooed on his head, and he's got a cross on his neck, and he's got all kinds of stuff. And then he comes out into the masjid, and he comes and he's salam, tattoos going up his arm, everywhere. And people don't know how to deal. We don't know how to deal with that. Like, who is this guy saying assalamu alaikum to us, right? We're afraid. They are truly afraid. So what I tell them to do, at least wear some long sleeves, right? Cover up as much of the tattoo as you can. The ones on your face and all that, I'm not sure what, put some makeup on it or something, right? But show up to the masjid, make your salah, and leave. And once they see you come, make the salah and leave for a couple months, then you will find that people start to open up. Brother, I see you come all the time, and then that gives you a chance to talk about, I was in prison for this long. I became a Muslim and I just want to practice my religion. And then that's it. Eventually you would start to see the community open up. This is my advice to them, right? Malik, one of the things that we do in prison, and I can say that at least the Muslim community that I deal with inside the prison, every single Ramadan, every inmate that I deal with, including non-Muslim inmates that want to fast with us, they read the Quran from cover to cover.
Allahu Akbar.
Every inmate for the last 6 years. For the last 6 years, every inmate that I've decided to reads the Quran from cover to cover in Ramadan.
MashaAllah.
Something that I can, if I can go out on a limb and say, you probably still have Muslim on the outside that don't read the Quran from cover to cover during Ramadan.
Yeah.
This is something that we do every single Ramadan that I have been to in this institution. They read the Quran from cover to cover. While they may not digest everything the Quran has to say, little by little, they start to get an idea how Muslims are supposed to live. And it's interesting, 2 years ago, one of the non-Muslim inmates that decided to fast with us and read the Quran after Ramadan was over, and he's going through his normal prison life, right? Something happened that reminded him of something. He said, oh, you know, the Quran said so and so. This is a non-Muslim inmate. And we went through, for the hadith of Imam Nawawi, I did a course on Imam Nawawi, Arba'in al-Nawawi, and he took the course with me in the prison. And he would see something in his prison life and he says, oh, you know, hadith number so-and-so says so-and-so. And this is a non-Muslim inmate. This is a non-Muslim inmate. So again, how Allah guides their heart and their mind down the road is Allah is going to do what He does, right? Our job is to convey the message, but I ensure that these brothers, if I can call them that, right, read the Quran every single year in Ramadan from cover to cover. And I change my schedule. I go in at noon and I leave after we break the fast, and I sit there and read the Quran with them every single night, Monday through Thursday, right? I read the Quran with them. I bounce from yard to yard, and even in the year when I'm not there, they get together inside the chapel and they read the Quran and they read that one juz' for that night, and they read the Quran, complete the Quran every year for the last 6 years. For the last 6 years. So our community out here, we can do better in welcoming them, right? They want community, right? They want, I mean, I talk us up. I talk really good things about the Muslim community on the outside. Oh, you know, when you go to Eid Salah, you're going to see Muslims from all around the world, and, you know, you can meet people, I talk it up. But unfortunately, sometimes they come out and they don't see that.
We don't live up to it.
We don't live up to it, unfortunately. And we can, that's not a difficult thing. You know, if we just treat each other, I mean, why would a non-Muslim be at Eid Salah?
Yeah.
The fact that they're there is more than likely because they're Muslim. Regardless of the tattoos, they're Muslim, right? So why would you treat them any differently because they have tattoos, right? But I guess that is a learning curve that we're just not on just yet, unfortunately, right? Yeah. But I talk up our community, no matter which community it is. Just tell them, when you get out, the first thing you do is find them, look around, Google it, find a masjid. And if you go there and you feel good about going there, continue to go. If you don't feel good, try to find another one and go until you find one that you like. And then continue to go there. And that's the advice that I give them. But yes, we can do a better job in welcoming them, right? Just like we can do a better job in welcoming the reverts in general, or the Latinos in general. You know, we can do a better job at all these things. And that is the problem. We don't have the infrastructure, right, to deal with many of our brothers and sisters when they come out. You know, or a good friend of mine, our brother Ahmed Khalil Gramajo, is from Nicaragua. I believe he's from Nicaragua. He wrote an article some time ago, and it was published in some of the Islamic publication. It says, Da'wah, Shahada, and then what? That's what he titled it, right? Because when someone shows interest in Islam, they get invited to all come to my house for dinner today, right? And they feel so good. And then they take Shahada, and literally the day they take Shahada, everyone disappears. No one invites them to their home after that. This has been the experience. And revert after revert after it will tell you the exact same thing Why?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, they haven't changed. If anything, they have become better by taking the Shahada. So why would you not invite them to your home after they've taken the Shahada? It's a very interesting thing. And I don't know, I don't have the answer to it, but this is what happens, right?
SubhanAllah.
So I'm hoping that we as a community can do a little bit better welcoming those guys that come out of prison, or girls, you know, because they're Muslim women in prison also, welcoming those reverts, welcoming the people. Just deal with each other on a human level.
Yes.
Right? You know, we all say, Shahadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. We may have different experiences, but this is the goal. The goal is
absolutely
most people. I don't know of anyone that says, you know, my goal is to go to the hellfire in a day. I don't know anyone that says that. Well, you know, everyone wants Jannah. We just have probably different ways of going about it, right? But everybody wants success, both in this life as well as the hereafter, right? But so I'm hoping that we can be a little bit better at that.
Inshallah. And, you know, we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, hopefully, you know, through conversations like this, we can start hammering home the point in our community that we need to be more welcoming. We need to be more accommodating. We need to be more open, like the community of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we read about. We've done enough reading about it.
Right.
We need to start enacting it, right? We've done enough reading and everything about what's going on overseas. We need to start acting. We need to start doing things. And, you know, it really starts locally and can have global effects. You know, everything starts off with a small thing. What is it? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Right.
So
that's only if you're walking.
Yeah.
That's only if you're walking, right? Today we don't do 1,000 miles unless we're flying, right? But you still have to get to the airport. I get it.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, just taking whatever step that is that we can, and knowing that any and everything that we do, especially locally, actually does have an effect globally.
Right.
So, you know, remembering to work locally, do what we can, and inshallah that will have a larger effect on our society and our ummah and the world in general, inshallah ta'ala.
And the hadith of the Prophet is true, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ. The action is rewarded, judged by the intention behind it. If the intention is good, Allah will reward the act, you know, even before you've done it. You know, I intend to do good and you get a good deed, right? So Allah will reward the action if the intention is good. So if our community at large, if our larger Muslim have the proper intent and and really, we may not have the wherewithal to put everything that we would like to see into practice, but if we have the intent to do it, Allah will then make a way out for us and will make it come through, inshallah. And I want to thank you for the invitation.
Of course.
You know, Sahaba Initiative, I've been working with you guys for quite some time.
Alhamdulillah.
You know, it's been a while, and I am really, truly pleased to see the progress that you have made over the years. And I'm hoping that we can help, you know, foster this relationship even more, and do some more work together, inshallah.
Absolutely. You know, that is the name of the game, doing as much work as we can together, inshallah, to inshallah build our place in Jannah. As you said, all our goal is to get to Jannah.
Yes.
And you know, one of my favorite quotes, and it's actually the quote on the back of all of our shirts that we give to volunteers. It's by Muhammad Ali, where he said that service to others is the rent that I pay for my space here on earth.
Absolutely, subhanallah.
And you know, inshallah, we're all just trying to pay rent.
Pay rent, yeah, exactly.
Serve others, and inshallah, we can get our place in Jannah.
Right.
Jazakallah khair. Shaykhna Imam Reymundo, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you and everything that you do, and coming and talking with us, joining us on the Companions for Change podcast. Jazakumullah khair for all of you watching. Wassalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.